So we are here at Georgia State University on Tuesday, November 19th, 2013, and we are conducting a joint interview with Faye and Dell, founders of 7 Stages, to follow up on their individual interviews that we conducted a few months ago. My name is Hillary Rink, and I'll be doing the interviewing. And first of all, thanks for sending the information over. Stephen also sent a little bit of info based on, I guess, looking through some of the transcripts from the previous interviews. So what I've done is I sort of organized things into there are sort of 2 main areas I want to probe. Some of the topics are focused more on sort of process and organizational issues about the theater, about the arts as a business, etc. And then the other sort of big bucket that I want to hit on is content issues, programming issues, your influences, etc. Mm-hmm. So those are the 2 sort of broad areas, and obviously I'm sure there's going to be overlap, so we're just going to let it flow as it flows, but that's at least starting out the way I'm envisioning it. Mm-hmm. And obviously if there are things as we get into it that I haven't asked and that you feel is important to bring up at that point, please jump in. And I'm probably not going to rehash a lot of the stuff from the other interviews because people can listen to those. So let's start off with process organizational issues. One of the things that I wanted to probe a little bit more on is we know the history of how 7 Stages was founded and how you 2 got together. Can you talk a little bit about, at that creation point, why did you decide to go the 7 Stages route? And Stephen actually had a question to me. Why was Theatrical Outfit as an entity abandoned? Why was that not used as sort of the building block and morphed into something else?
Well, I know that some of the members of the original Theatrical Outfit have been in touch with the archive program here in hopes that some of the materials that they have gathered from 1976-77 can become part of the archives here. Mm-hmm. Now, whether the present outfit administration wants to contribute its archives, that's something that's not known to me. So that will be of benefit, and that will add a lot of insight into the kinds of stuff that I could contribute about that right now. Mm-hmm. So as to why the outfit dissolved in its original incarnation, of course it's still alive today. It's been through a number of changes, and now it's a very respectable small theater that does pretty intelligent plays, I would say. The early outfit was started to reach out to institutions, as I mentioned last interview, to residents in prisons and old folks' homes, and we enacted the stories for them of how we got there, including all the people we had to talk to and be interviewed by, and we sort of recreated those characters for the benefit of the residents. And then we decided that we wanted to do more performance-related activities, so we started rehearsing plays and such. And we did a few plays, Sam Shepard plays and some others for some years, and then did a production of Macbeth. And we arranged for a tour up the East Coast and ended up in New York at a small theater on, I think it was about East 3rd Street, an NYU theater. They had a number of black box theaters that were not used at the time, and so we had some resources and we got the doors open. And so I will say that Macbeth has notoriously been a play that has caused theater companies to collapse. And there's a famous book about superstitions related to the Scottish play.
Yes.
And one of the chapters is about companies that had dissolved, and sadly 7 Stages was one of them.
No, Theatrical Outfit.
Sorry?
Theatrical Outfit, that's
what did I say? Oh, thank you.
Now you're going to have to go outside, turn around 3 times and spit.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, of course, it was the outfit's last production together in its first incarnation. And so at first we were independent artists in different disciplines, and we wanted to make new performances together, and we satisfied all that in 2 years. I think some of us had the intention of going further and longer, but some of us didn't want to do that. And so on the journey up the East Coast, the company unraveled in its incarnation. And we came back here, it took some months before we finally dissolved it all. So that's what it was. It was that Scottish play that tore us apart.
But everybody, so also there were a lot of individual artists, non-theater artists, musicians and dancers, and so some of them sort of wanted to get back to their own craft as well. And so people just said, okay, I'm out of here, and different, and it sort of ended up with David Head and Sharon Levy in the room, left, and they went, okay, then what do we want to do? And so that's how the outfit itself continued.
Right. One of the things that I think you guys can probably offer some insight on, given the fact that you ran basically a business for 30 years. Talk a little bit about the whole issue of running a cultural organization, a theater, an arts organization as your business. What are some of the challenges and things that you feel that you had to encounter running that versus if you were running a dress shop or a store? Talk a little bit about the whole business of being in the arts or in culture.
I used to have this saying, I said it all the time, it's like trying, it's like I have a tofu restaurant and I'm like next to a hamburger place. Maybe there are a few people coming in for the tofu, but most everybody's going to the hamburger place. So I'm trying to sell a product that I have to educate people about. I have to educate them that it even exists. And so to create a kind of a demand for the product is very, very challenging, especially if you don't have a lot of money, because you can't buy advertising. Back in the day, there was a lot more pro bono advertising. There was a time in the early days, well, not even in the early days, I think 87, we had this wonderful German artist. He had come with Sigrid Herzog, and anyway, he was known more primarily in Munich as a painter, but he also did stages. And so Marcel Keller is his name. And so we together went down, I should give somebody credit, I think it was Channel 5. And we went down there and he talked them into allowing him to make a cartoon on their computers that they showed as a PSA for the show. Now, today that wouldn't really happen, I don't
What
think.
show was it for?
It was called Der Frosch. And it was a German new translation of a German play that we were doing. So
Der Frosch means the frog, auf Deutsch in German, by Herbert Achternbusch, who was a famous avant-garde filmmaker in Germany who also dabbled in writing plays. And so Sigrid Herzog, we knew through her affiliation with the Kammerspiele Theater in Munich. And so she sort of went through with us the playwrights that she found interesting, and that was the one. And so it's The Frog is about a frog, me, in a world of humans. And I'm an artist. And so how does an artist fit into society is the theme of that one, of course. And Faye is my muse, who has a can of glitter that she spreads on me so that I'll glisten all the time.
you got to keep him wet. He's a frog,
Yeah.
Right.
So it also brought up a lot of interesting male and female role issues as well. And
That was quite funny.
yeah.
What year was that? When did you produce it?
That was, I guess, it must have been 80, I think it was 87.
80s. And was it well received?
Oh, it was, very well received. There was a good sense of humor in it. And, it's the inside story is it's the Bavarians against the Prussians, kind of North versus South kind of thing. So the cast, and we're all Bavarian or Southern German, of course, and we're making fun of all the, all these tricks about even like sending these Prussian guys off snipe hunting and, all these kind of funny jokes about things and about between the North and the South. And we went vacationing in Yugoslavia, but don't tell because it's so cheap there. Nobody, you don't want to tell anybody that's where you went, But so anyway.
In my effort, of course, to try to fit into society so I'd have a meaningful role as an artist, I, of course, thought I would need to bleach my hair bright orange and make it spiky, which I did. But, that's the typical dilemma of an artist. He doesn't really know how to fit into society. He just has ideas about how to do it that end up making him even further an outlier, an outsider.
Yeah, but I think there's an interesting point to that. which is that as the artist, this is something that Sigrid told us, and she has red hair, whether it's henna or real, I don't know. But she said that traditionally in maybe medieval Europe, this idea of having red hair was really bad. I mean, there were women who were burned at the stake simply because they had red hair. They thought it was a troublemaker person. And so there was always this negative kind of connotation to red hair. And so by dyeing the artist's hair red, you can see that the artist in society is in his own way dangerous. If you want to follow it through in that direction. So, but I think that was also, a big part of it, that, the troublemaker, the one who calls attention, the one who...
Well, that's a perfect segue. The troublemaker, the artist is troublemaker. What type of encounters over the years or issues did you have, with your organization vis-a-vis city government or other arts organizations? I mean, what were some of the challenges that you faced with other entities? Either, maybe they were good interactions, but I'm sure at some point you probably encountered issues with city government on permitting or content or something. I'm just curious, what were some of the issues organizationally that you guys had to face?
That's an excellent question. It goes back to what is a nonprofit in today's culture. I mean, originally when it was created by the government, it was created to plug in the gaps in government services. The government couldn't provide something, so create a nonprofit industry that fills that function. But now the government is so broad and extensive, and it now permeates into nonprofits themselves, not only through providing support and grants and such, but also providing people and programs and like that. So it's a much more pervasive in the culture kind of activity, this whole business of running a nonprofit. And so there are main obstacles that we confront, and they are the government entities that support us and the corporations that used to support us and should but don't. So how do we get into those very dense structures so that they can do what they ought to do, which is support the nonprofit system across the board, not just in the arts? That's what we're all struggling with, is how to find a way to interface. And technology is creating barriers to that, because the the large institutions like governments and corporations have budgets to hire people who can interface with technology. Small nonprofits, even wealthy ones, only have small departments at best to deal with that issue. So there's a widening gap there.
Income inequality?
Yeah, well, income inequality is about what it is, I think,
Yeah, I remember there was a conference. I wasn't actually at the conference, but one of our staff was there, and they said they were just glowing. Everybody was raving about the Alliance's new website and how fantastic it was, and how, I guess this was back in the time when people were just sort of getting their websites going, and it was the model that was held up to everybody, but it was like they had already spent $150,000 on it, whatever it ended up being, and I'm like, you can't. We have maybe $5,000 for the whole year. What do you mean? So it's in that sense it's hard to compete. But I thought of something like more anecdotal, I guess. But
yeah, stories are great. That's what we're after. People learn through stories.
I know. And Del actually probably knows. Will end up telling the rest of this story. But it was the theater has always been a rental space, and prior to us running the building, it was a dance theater. And it had been used by dance companies forever and ever, well, for years anyway. And so there was a dancer, and I don't know her name, and she may have already been a pre-agreed to rental, because when we inherited the building in January, it was still rented for a certain period of time by the previous manager. So I'm not sure if we actually booked them or not, is my point. At any rate, so she has a little children's like dance company, like 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds and things like this. And we had an exhibit of an artist named Taylor. His name Taylor. Okay. Anyway, he was at the Atlanta College of Art, and he was really respected as he's a young gay man, very, smart, intelligent, good artist. But he had this particular style, which was interesting. It was kind of like I want to say primitive work, naive, and but it was funny. And so like for example, there was a picture, a naive drawing or painting of a cow, and then each udder had a tube coming out, and each tube was a different color maybe or something, and then it was labeled urine or, you know. Anyway, so this woman, the dancer woman, became hysterical because her children were going to see this, you know. And so she demanded that we take the art down. And we said, no, we can't do that. We can't take the art down. I mean, it's you know, we have an agreement. We have a, you know, a heart-to-heart with this man, and it's his work. And, I mean, if he was here and he said he could do that, that would be different. But, no, we can't do it. And he was not in there. I think he was, like, in L.A. or someplace, right? And at any rate, the woman who was somewhat influential, shall we say, had a lot of money and very sort of Southern. And so she tried to pull in some of her chips. And there was another artist who was asked to bring his work in. And this was but this was like a high-end artist, you know, and they show up with these big trucks outside and they start unloading these really large paintings, you know, and like maybe 6 by 10, I mean, huge. And their idea is to hang it on top of his work, Tyler's work. And so the artist, as soon as he you know, they're starting to hang, and he's going, wait a minute, what's going on here? And he said, I'm not having my art on top of somebody else's art. And so he refused to let them do that. So he had his art taken down and put back on the truck. Meanwhile, someone who was head of Fulton County at the time, who was influenced by...
The Arts Council.
Yeah, the Arts Councils, yeah.
It's interesting to hear. I think I told this version before, but I like hearing your story.
I don't remember.
So at any rate, he was there, and he was just screaming at Dell. I mean, pointing his finger in his face. I thought his head was going to explode. It was so red, and Dell just kept saying no. And he just, I don't know, I think I turned away. I was like scared. I ran upstairs. I don't know what happened after that. Thought it was going to be like a fist fight or something. But anyway, that's a blank part in my story. But then in the end, they did not take the art down. We left it up, and the dancers they brought in, you know, like lunchroom tables with their, you know, they would have that anyway with all their stuff, and crepe paper and big balloons, like so many balloons you couldn't see the art.
Were there any repercussions from the county?
Well, the repercussions began that evening because the artists heard about it, and they came to demonstrate.
Yeah, the artists, so, community life.
So about 100 or 150 artists, visual artists mostly, showed up. And
sign.
But there were no incidents. I mean, they just sort of held up posters and shouted at parents who were bewildered as they went in to watch their children dance. And then I would say 6 months or so later, the head of that Arts Council resigned. So we don't know if there was any relationship at all. Probably not. But it wasn't.
But there weren't threats to you in terms of, we're going to pull your funding, or we're going to...
No, there were suggestions. I mean, yeah, the Fulton County Arts Council asked me to come to a council meeting and make a statement. And they asked this person who was the head of the Arts Council to do so too. He declined to do that, and instead sent one of the main litigators at Alston and Bird, who gave a speech, you know, like it was in the courtroom. And, you know, I mean, I'm okay as an actor, but I was really scared, you know. And we had our lawyer, who was just a friend, not his area. He had done a couple of white papers about censorship for us, and sort of he was holding my hand. And then I just had to get up, and I couldn't even stand. My knees were shaking, so I had to ask for a chair, and I sat down, and I read this statement about what had happened. And then, it was real silent, you know, and the whole place was just jammed to overflowing with people.
And you know he could read the hell out of it.
Because this was a very heady time of censorship, so it wasn't like an isolated moment. There were a number of censorship activities occurring in the city and especially around the country.
So this was the late 80s, mid-80s?
This was the late 80s, right around
this was
88
right
or
around
89.
Okay.
In fact, John Frongmeyer, who was the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts at the time, came to Atlanta and gave a famous speech from 7 stages, during which he announced that the National Endowment for the Arts was going to withdraw its funding for 4 artists it considered to be pornographic. Mm-hmm. And we have since presented 3 of those on our stage, by the way, multiple times. And so that was the last time the National Endowment for the Arts ever provided arts grants for individual artists. and it's not likely to happen ever again, not within our lifetimes anyway. So that was that was like a confrontation moment, I suppose. But generally speaking, our organizations have very good relations with funding agencies and government sources especially. I say that, however, there was the Georgia Council for the Arts. And I'm glad to say this out loud publicly, because we received a lot of funding. And how the grant system works in the governments is you get a certain amount of money one year. If you do well enough and you report, then the next year you get a little bit more, and it keeps increasing. So we had our grant level up to about $35,000 at one point, which for us per year, which is a pretty good grant for a small organization in Georgia. But the managing director didn't submit his grant on the deadline that year. So that meant we were zeroed out from that point on, and then we started from zero the next year, not from 35,000. So we never got the amount of funding in 10 to 15 years back to anything beyond $5,000 or $6,000. And I always found that to be very offensive for an organization like Seven Stages in the state of Georgia to be disrespected like that. And it wasn't that we got bad panel reviews or anything like that. It was that we had built up a deficit, and the staff at the Georgia Council for the Arts felt that the deficit was more significant than the art or community work that we were doing. And so they more or less guided the panel consideration to that conclusion. So that's what happens when you get the wrong people managing the few little tax dollars they are. I mean, they become very conservative because they don't want to lose their bureaucratic jobs by making the wrong choice or something, and so they're not going to select meaty activity like we do.
Did you ever run into political issues either with funders or with individuals, be they artists or patrons or donors, related to your content, given the fact that Seven Stages wasn't doing, a remount of The Sound of Music?
Right. Well, I remember one time we were trying to get a grant from AT&T back in the day when they actually gave us grants, and we were doing a play. I guess it was either My Children, My Africa, or it was one of Apple Fugard's scripts, and they said no, we're not touching it. It's apartheid in South Africa, we're not touching it. And that was that. It was just like we were off the table. And obviously that's totally content. And, other organizations that we had a conflict with just made me think of it was the South African Secret Police. We were doing a play with a play written by Adam Small, and Adam was with us in the theater and working, and it was a really... and
he was South African?
Yeah. He was, in quotes, colored South African. And anyway, they had Secret Service people there monitoring us, and our phone was tapped as well.
And was that in South Africa?
No, that was right here in Atlanta.
In Atlanta.
Right.
Yeah, we were...
so they came all the way from South Africa to
or they had
follow
agents.
This guy?
I'm sure they have agents who operate in the United States anyway.
There's some... Adam Small is a notorious sort of a colored South African poet. He also was the head of the Department of Social Work at the University of the Western Cape in Cape Town. So he was quite prominent as a possible dangerous person during the apartheid years, and there are famous videos that he showed me in his house in Cape Town once of his poems being read aloud in the South African Parliament, and then as an example of how dangerous poets can be. And then they panned through the legislature. Most seats were empty and most people were sleeping who were in the seats. It's a hysterical comment that he made about it. But anyway, we did his play called Kana, He Is Coming Home, which dealt with the idea that young South African males were leaving the country to get educated while
and not coming
Mandela
back.
was in prison, and then they would come back and save the country. But they weren't coming back. They were staying in America, or especially Canada or London, and why return to an apartheid country? And so all the young male population was basically leaving the country, and so Adam's plaint was, where's our Moses? Who's the guy that's coming back to lead us out of this? And it was a really striking comment in South Africa. And ours was a beautiful production of it too, by the way. So what else?
So would the the South African secret police or whatever, would they come into the theater? Or
Yeah.
would they just follow him around town? Or
They would be in the theater. I mean,
could you say,
was,
we want you to leave, and they would refuse?
We
or?
had a panel meeting, with Adam on the panel, and me and a couple of other people. And it was about apartheid and the issues, and so we're sitting up there, and Adam leaned over to me and he said, "Those two guys in the back are secret police. What are they doing here?" And I said, "How do you know that?" And he said, "Well, I recognize them." And then our phones had this suspicious clicking noise. So, there's a number you can call with the phone company. They won't tell you who it is, but they are required to tell you if it's being monitored. And yes, it was. And that sent shivers through our entire community, as you can imagine. Because we were doing work that we thought was rather pure, sort of educating our audiences about this situation that we vaguely knew about. Corporations were about to get on board, by the way. AT&T did the following year, but they were really scared of apartheid until Coca-Cola stepped forward, in fact, and started providing money. So, yeah, that was interesting. And no, we never confronted the guys. Adam didn't want to talk to them directly either. And they just looked like average people. One guy in a T-shirt, shorts, another guy in like a regular shirt. They didn't look like Secret Service guys.
They didn't have sunglasses and trench coats.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so then once that production was over, did your clicking on your phone stop?
Yeah, I think so.
As a matter of fact.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's weird.
And then the other time, well, what else? We're talking about
Which
what?
about organizations and individuals we've had conflicts with.
Right, yeah, or things based on the fact that you dealt with,
And
controversial
censorship.
topics, et cetera, and sort of
Yeah.
maybe how that played into your life as an organization
Yeah.
versus if you had been a theater company that did very mainstream.
It's
Well,
made
I-
it harder
work.
for funding, of course.
Yeah.
If our work was easier, it would be easier to get money. But we became very good at targeting sources of funding that we thought would be supportive even of the controversial content.
And what type
Never
of
enough of that. But
what type of sources did you find to be more receptive? Individuals, foundations, government agencies, companies, or was there any?
I would say, yeah, it's a combination, but we've had particular success with government agencies. For example, we participated in a 5-year-long project called the U.S.-Netherlands Theater Exchange. And this was funded primarily by the Netherlands Theater Institute. At that time, it was 5 branches of theater under a larger art umbrella, and all funded very heavily by the Dutch government. Now that's all disintegrated, but then it was pleasant, and they provided 5 years worth of guaranteed support for this project, which was to identify 3 Dutch groups and bring them to 5 U.S. cities for 5 years. So they had a guaranteed 5-week tour in the U.S., and we had a guaranteed return from 5 different groups. And so we could build an audience to prove that that's how you could do it. In fact, we did. We were completely successful with those events.
And the Dutch influence, in its own way, it still goes on. And because Onno van Click Toneel, which is one of the companies that we worked with, were based in Rotterdam. After presenting them, and we really hit it off with a lot of the companies, special Stuff Puppet, but Onno van Click Toneel asked Del and one of our students, Sa Ngauja, who was in our youth program, which is Youth Ensemble of Atlanta, and asked them if he would like to work on something. So together with them, and it was an adaptation of Emmanuel Puig's novel An Eternal Curse on the Readers of These Pages, which turns out it was a book of secret codes that he had written while he was in prison. And had he, once the code was broken, then he's cursing you. So, at any rate, he's finally. What was the name of your character? I'm sorry, I don't remember right now. Ramirez. Anyway, he's much older now. He's out of prison. He lives in the West Village, and he hires this young Vietnam vet guy to basically push him around the village and take him to the grocery store, lunch, whatever. And it's normal. Relationship is but it finally builds, and it's very heartfelt, and it really, really comes together in this amazing way through generational ideas. And Sa, who then ended up getting an amazing scholarship to Dutch university to continue his work, which included graduate work that he went back to Sierra Leone to do film work, and then later he's cast as Fela in the Fela that was on Broadway. He was, the lead actor in Fela. And Bill T. Jones, who had also spent a lot of time in Holland, they both are fluent in Dutch, was the director. And so it was like this immediate connection between them, and Rodessa Jones, who was Bill T.'s sister, had also worked at Seven Sages and had a long-lasting relationship with us. So it was just like this, and look.
Yeah, that's a very good analogy, because I think a lot of, I think what we've done is taken lots of different resources and blended them together in order to make a given project.
Mm-hmm.
So by resources, I mean money, sources, individuals, but especially the resources of our friend organizations and the artists themselves. And so it's a combination of a lot of generosity that keeps these kind of projects going, I think, often to the dismay of the projects. Because, if you lack resources, you get in the middle of something, you can't really stop.
Right.
And you have to find a way
Cut
to
the budget.
maintain it.
And when was this partnership with the Dutch theater?
That would have been
The early 90s?
early to mid
Middle
90s,
90s, okay.
in that vicinity.
Mhm.
And so there was in New York, New Orleans, Baltimore, and Philadelphia involved. And it was pretty major, actually.
And the cushy part of it, I'm sorry not to cut
No,
you
go
off,
ahead,
but
no,
we
no.
were invited for 2 weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks, all, in quotes, expenses paid trip to travel around the Netherlands and look at art. Gee.
Yeah, that's the part the Dutch paid for. They invited all of the the directors of each of the theaters to come there each year
NTW,
to
the
tour
public.
around and meet people, not just see shows, but go into the studios, shake hands, have lunch and dinner, all provided as part of the deal. And then the idea was that you find compatibility and match it up.
Like one of the phrases I think we gave you on that sheet was the best ideas come over food.
Mm-hmm.
That was from this Dutch experience, because every time you would go into the studio, they all had food, and we'd eat lunch and we'd talk and we'd exchange ideas.
Yeah,
and
this is a quotation that's above the canteen in the Zouderlink studio, which is South Holland, and it's a very interesting warehouse that they built. They didn't just move into an old warehouse. They built a warehouse that could be their theater and living place. And they have a huge cafe in the middle of it that says, good ideas happen over food. And so they invite companies from all over the world to have lunch with them when they're on a rehearsal break. And it's become quite a phenomenon, actually. So the result is that we meet a lot of people as we're making these projects happen. And we've had a lot of success with government agencies, foreign ministries, state departments, the Goethe Institute, French consuls, even the Macedonian Arts Council director, providing some sort of support for us.
Mm-hmm.
One project we organized was a tour, and Faye, you might want to talk about this more than me, of Terminal. And Terminal is a famous avant-garde theater production from the Open Theater in New York in the 1969. 1969. It went to Belgrade to the BITEF Festival, which is a major international festival. It still exists. And they won first prize. Joe Chaikin was the director of the Open Theater, and so we were in very good, long contact with many of them for years. And then finally, they approached us about helping to organize a 30-year version of that performance, which they did. They took 4 of the original members and recast several, and Joe directed it in New York, and we raised the resources, and we got them to the BTEF premiere 30 years later. And so, yeah, that was organizing money from the festival and various governments, and getting grants. The NEA, I think, funded that one. And so it just depends. When you write a grant, somebody reads it. If it catches their fancy, or they know somebody and it can provide credibility, that's really like the magic key that opens up the funding well.
Yeah, and there is a prejudice in against the South. I think maybe everybody knows that. I don't know, but I think it's very, it's the idea of working with the Open Theater. I mean, just Joe's name on, is so powerful that people were like, okay, so this is something we should pay attention to. I think especially because I don't know how we ever would have afforded that one.
Mhm.
I got to live in New York. That was fun. And oh yeah, we lived in New York too during the when the world was green, Chef's Fable, which is one of the Sam Shepard plays that we commissioned for the Olympics, and so he and Joe wrote it, and it was great. Of course, again, like I say, people, and so Sam said, I need a rehearsal space, so the public went, Joe and Sam, yeah, sure, anything you want. Which room do you want? And so the fun thing of it was it's a 2-person script. And oddly enough, because we had just come back from Albania, where blood revenge is illegal and still going on, this play had to do with blood revenge. And anyway, we would go every day to the public, or 5 days a week or whatever, and just read what they had written the night before. And listen to them banter back and forth about what this and that. And Joe always kept saying, no, you should write more for the woman, more woman, And then we'd had different people would come in who were friends of theirs, like one day Marcia Gay Harden was there, and then Jim O'Quinn, who runs the American Theater, publisher of the American Theater magazine, and so just different people who were very interested, and it was just an amazing process to be that close to it and part of it in that way. So that was pretty cool.
It seems like over the course of your time at Seven Stages, developing and sustaining these sort of cooperative arrangements with other arts organizations, not just other theaters, seems to be part of the essence of Seven Stages. And talk to me a little bit about how that came about. Was that a conscious decision early on that you wanted to be cooperative in sort of a larger art scene, or did it come from maybe one early instance where you had to create an agreement with some other organization and then sort of said, oh, that's sort of neat, that works?
Mm-hmm.
I want to understand a little bit of, did you fall into this, or did you consciously say, we want to sort of have this cooperative thing versus just going it alone ourselves?
Right. I think that, for one thing, I would say that Ellen Stewart, La Mama, she is La Mama, and she told us very, very early on that don't think so much about the product. Think about relationships with people, and that having relationships with other artists is really what has sustained us. And many of the artists have, of course, small organizations that are part of that. And that's the sort of more practical side of it. But I think also that theater is such a collaborative art that in a sense it can come naturally, especially if you, like with the Da, when we first met Da, how were we going to work with this company of women who were from Eastern Europe and who were living in the middle of a war? And I mean, how was this going to...
We never worked with another company before. We were there first.
Yeah, we were there first, right? That it had really worked.
And can you give me just a brief background on Da, how you came across them?
There was
where they're from.
Yeah, they're from Belgrade, Serbia, and they started as a female company. There were 4 or 5 women. Dijana Milosevic is the artistic director, and they started their theater in opposition to Milosevic, and so it was this 91 when the war started there, and they did not have their own space. They were all very, very well trained, but not in the National Theater, and so they started this company, and I guess, was it BTEF? It was some festival or something, and a woman who worked with us, Lisa James, was it NTW in New York? Dance Theater Workshop?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyway.
On the boards in Seattle.
Yeah, and on the boards in Seattle. So anyway, she was invited to this festival, and she went, and as so many stories go, the heart was won over, and she fell madly in love with this woman, Duca Kanivovic.
Okay, hold that thought. I'm going to back up a little bit.
Okay.
Because Lisa was hired, when she came to Atlanta, we hired her because we needed somebody to help manage renovation of the building that was coming up.
And grants.
And she had this background in how do you find a coalition of people to work together, which is your question.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were sitting in the lobby. In those days, we had circle meetings in the lobby to take on various conversations, mostly informal. And we were sitting in the lobby one day. I remember it clear as day, and Lisa and I were looking at one another, and we were talking about the war in the Balkans and how, as Americans, we know nothing about what is going on there. What's that all about? We knew nothing. And so it was 6 months later that Lisa was on a plane going to a festival in Slovenia. But we had very intense conversations about it, and there was a lot of press at the time, too, so it was sort of a topic, I think, and Clinton was messing things up over there and things like that. So, and I think, yeah. So it was that conversation in the lobby, and then just our, what would you call it, naivete about, well, we're going to go to the Balkans and find out the answers to some of these questions. So
and we're
yes,
going to go with our other actor friends, and it'll all be
at
great.
this festival in Slovenia, in Ljubljana, Lisa met at the Women of Light Festival. She met these artists from Belgrade. It was unusual that artists were traveling between countries because this was right during the war in the Balkans, and so nobody knew who they were supposed to like or not like at that time because they'd been living together for decades. So that's how that started. And then you were saying?
She fell in love.
Oh, yes.
Dutza
Thank
fell
you.
in love.
So Lisa and Dutza fell in love, and kind of that was it. You know, we became, because, well, so Dutza worked with and had gone to university with Deanna and most of the women in the Dog Company. So she was a playwright, a very well-known playwright, and primarily a dramaturg and I guess a reviewer, a critic. She was very well respected, even though she was quite young, maybe early 30s, something like that. Anyway, so that was it. You know, we just said, okay, how are we going to figure out to do something together? And we raised money from the George Soros Foundation and for the Trust for Mutual Understanding, both very much directing their funds towards Eastern Europe and the Balkans. And
Dutza worked for the BTEF Festival, so she arranged for an invitation to get us there. That it was very unusual. And they took care of it all, the hotel, the travel, and everything. We just managed it, so to speak, and got there. So we had it was a kind of an affiliation with another group that was this resource that we were able to exploit in a friendly way. And I think for each project we have to identify what are these resources that we need, and do they exist? And if not, you have to either wait or give up. For example, we just... Today, you gave the date today. We just finished a residency with a company from Dimona, Israel. Dimona is a very small town in the southern desert of Israel, and 5 artists moved there 4 years ago to start a theater group. So 7 Stages invited them to come to do their performance of Knows One Nowhere. And it was an unbelievably huge success. I mean, people loved that. So now we've
the artists love being here as well.
To bring it about, we had to get financial resources and other support from the Israeli consul. Many individuals in the Jewish and Israeli community stepped forward and provided some money. And that's about it. We didn't have any foundation or corporate assistance for this. And so we had individuals and the good intentions of the Israeli consul. And now we've got this first successful performance. Hundreds of people that saw it and really loved it, and so now we've got a little network formed for the future, including getting our stuff over to Israel. So we've proved we can do it now, so now we can start asking for money because there's the beginning of a track record.
Yeah, and the third leg of this table is
our artistic director, Heidi Howard, is over there in Tel Aviv right now as we speak.
Yeah, she left
on
yesterday.
the second part of this project development.
I was going to say we have the 3 legs, because when Del and I, at our own expense, went last year to Israel and attended these 2 festivals that now Heidi is at, and we made a connection with Mediatek, which is a really amazing institution, all kinds of programming for children, and they have their own library, and it's extremely well funded. They have a museum. It's just an incredible place. Anyway, this young woman, Yael Citron, who was very much a part of Mediatek, she's like the assistant to the artistic director. She came last, and we connected with her and with him, and so we made this invitation to bring her back this past summer to the Youth Creates program, and so she came as a teacher, and then I think there were 4 Israeli kids who came with her. So we've sort of been having this Israeli invasion going on, which is fantastic. And but the idea now we have Dimona, Mediatek, and us, and so it's going to create all kinds of possibilities. So again, maybe collaborating is.
So it's like putting out tentacles. I mean, the more we put out, the more resources emerge as we go forward with the project. It's not like the business world where you gather all the capital up front and then you make sure you've got the nut and then you go do your stuff.
Yeah.
You have to sort of gather the beginnings, even if it's only an inspiration, and then as you go down the road to making the project become real, then is when the resources come available.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fairly typical of all nonprofits. It's not just 7 stages.
I think
we're all in a very sad position.
Right, but it's also a wonderful adventure in its own right. I think there's a project that I don't know how much Del talked about it, but the Coltest project. There's a story before this one, but I'll start at the beginning of Coltest. We were sitting at our friend's house where we'd been staying for a week or so in Berlin, Frank and Michael.
And this is roughly time-wise?
89.
Okay.
Anyway, Michael is the editor of Theater Heute magazine, which is the most important theater magazine in Germany for sure. And we're asking, because we're always talking, and he's meeting all these international European people we haven't heard about, and he said, well, you've got to hook up with Bernard Marie Coltest. And so we spoke to him. Actually, Del did on the phone when we were in Berlin, and he said, yes, come visit, and we'll meet. We can chat, So Del and I said, okay, we're going to drive from Berlin to Paris. So we rent a car and we sort of drive through, stop at a gas station and buy a bottle of the best champagne we've ever had at the gas station because we just happened to be in the right province. And so anyway, we get to Berlin, and unfortunately, Mr. Coltest is too ill to meet with us. He was actually in the process of dying from AIDS. And
you mean you got to Paris?
Yes,
Okay.
we got to Paris.
Okay.
Yeah, and then
after finding a parking spot.
No.
But he just couldn't. I mean, he had the intention to meet with us, but he just was not well enough to do so.
Right.
So anyway, we'd just sort of been on this Coltest path then. We would just read his plays and learn more about him. And
so we were staying in the Hotel Atlanta in Paris, or had a 2-hour conversation with Coltest, who I could tell was passing away even as we spoke.
Yeah. You just had the phone. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was just incredible, though. And so again, we're several years later, perhaps, and we just finished a collaboration with a company called, was it Studio 5 in Jalapa, Mexico? And we had brought their artistic director and 1 or 2 of their actors in the company, and so we were doing this kind of very interesting production of adaptation.
Calderon's Life is a Dream.
Yeah.
Which we called Mishtitlan.
Yeah, which is not even an Aztec word, it's
Nahuatl.
Nahuatl. So we had 3 languages: Spanish, Nahuatl, and Aztec. But anyway, so this woman, this really lovely woman, after the show comes up to us and she just says, she's the French consul, not French consul, the cultural attaché. And so she goes, I don't understand, why haven't you done anything with France? What about France? And we went like, well, yeah, what about France? Sounds great. And so she said, well, what are you interested in? We said, Bernard Marie Coltest. And so we were just to show how magical it all was, at the next Avignon Festival, we were there interviewing young artistic directors or stage directors who considered themselves or were considered sort of experts in Coltest. And so we met, and then we also met with some in Paris as well, and then that all was terrific, and then we worked on the script, and then we hired this young director, Artur Nostasil. And when he was here, we developed this kind of strange process of translation, because the translation that they had was British. And it really just did not ring true to the American ear. And also, Coltest is a writer of elevated language. It's not like dialogue. It's very special. And so we would all sit in rehearsals, the French speakers, because there was a whole French team, the sound designer, stage designer, the director. That was it, 3? Anyway, and the actors, and hammer out a version of the script, which was just, the script turned out fantastic, because you had all these experts, native speakers, not native speakers, and it just created this whole new collaborational or process of translation, which was very exciting to everyone. And and then the show itself was called Black Battles with Dogs, and it's one of his most famous plays. He writes a lot about the Arabs and the African people who the French oppressed, I guess is the right word. And so it's this incredible. Waddell played the manager of this construction site, and there was a murder, and no one respected the black man who was murdered. They threw his body in the sewer. But for the Africans, it's a sacred thing. They have to bury him or he can't rest, so it became a very, I don't know. It was a very interesting, powerful story. And it played in the United States, oddly enough. It played in Atlanta because, the French oppressing the West Africans isn't so different than, So it was interesting. We did another show of his, same process, different director, called In the Solitude of the Cotton Fields, which was really abstract. And I would have to let Del describe that to you if you are interested, but it was also an interesting show that tons and tons of African Americans turned out for the production. So I think it's partially this idea also of heightened language.
Mm-hmm. And when it was translated into English, did you maintain that heightened language?
As best as the translation, yeah, it could.
An interesting feature that, Faye is talking about when we sat in the rehearsal period for Black Battles with Dogs, we were developing this new new translation approach. Not by committee, not by group, but by artists in the room, under the masterful guidance, I would say, of this director. And then, so that's the formula that we kept for the next productions too. But we also hired the guy who played the African guy in the first production, became totally obsessed with Coltès. Mm-hmm. Lived in Paris for a while and lived in the house with Coltès' brother, and they became extremely close friends. And so, and then he didn't speak French, but he convinced his brother that he should be the English translator of Coltès plays. So for several years, he was the only person allowed because he was translating the Coltès plays through this formula that we had created, which was getting the artistic team here and then over to a conference room at Emory.
Yeah, Emory got on board in the second
so
one.
Some literary people at Emory and some not theater people, but the other people at Emory and French department got interested in supporting the project, so it was their resources that we exploited to bring the artist down from France.
And who was this person?
Which one?
The one that was doing the translation into English?
Ismail.
Yes, his name is Ismail Ibn Connor.
Okay.
And so he was the official translator of In the Solitude of Cotton Fields, 2-character drama about 2 men who meet in the street. And the playwright had the notion, the poetic impulse, to write a 90-minute performance about that blink of a moment when people first make that contact. It's hard to articulate, but I think you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So he wrote this fairly intense dialogue about that, and you really felt like you're inside somebody's head, not the universe of the theater. Unfortunately, it was very avant-garde as well, and so I'm not so sure it attracted the audience as we'd hoped it would.
It was much more challenging for the audience than Black Battles with Dogs. Because there was a clear story of murder. You could see, but with this, it was so much more abstract that, yeah. They were dancing and sort of really making love on the floor some of the time, and then yet, on the other hand, yeah.
We did another Coltès version also with Ismail as the translator. And it was his adaptation of a Hamlet story that he was writing when he passed away. So it was not quite complete, but near enough that it could be made into an interesting version.
Days of Murder in the Life of Hamlet?
Yeah. And then Ismail wrote a couple of other translations, but that was the last one we could reasonably try to find the money for, because we didn't really attract a large enough audience to continue it. So we had to abandon the Coltès project.
Right. Which is where I sort of started out with this about money, like finding all this, having all this happen. In the meantime, the Black Battles with Dog, we toured in Paris, we performed in Paris, just standing ovations with even the stomping like the French like to do, which is, for an American show, it's pretty amazing. We performed in Clermont-Ferrand and Lorient, which is in Brittany on the coast. And so we had all those experiences, and then the following year, the same production, although Del had resigned from the performance at that, he didn't want to do it anymore, went to the In Festival in Avignon. And it's one thing to go to Avignon, but it's another thing to be actually in the festival, you know, and that was huge for us. And then it also performed at a festival in Greece, and you know, these are all very wonderful feathers in our caps and wonderful experiences, and the thing is that we did in the end run out of money. You know, there was just we couldn't get the money going. And so, you know, we were talking about this the other day. I said to Del, I thought it was one of our greatest successes because of, you know, how we started it, and it was magical and everything that came out of it. And then he was saying, really, I thought it was a failure because in the end we ran out of the money. And I'm like,
Yeah, I know, it's a delicate situation. I don't know how to assess that one. I think of it as a failure because we had a 5-year project laid out and we only got 3 of the years done.
And again,
But
it
also
started
we-
in what year?
the first production was 2001.
Okay.
Yeah.
We didn't get the resources developed. It didn't bubble up like it has in the past.
But
And so because of that, you know, we dealt in rehearsals with the frustrations of our guests who are admittedly involved in a theater system that gives them
anything they
probably
want.
more than they need to do a theatrical idea. But nevertheless, they brought that with them. And when we couldn't provide the resources that they needed, like on demand, like, oh, I know what we need here. We need a da-da-da-da. The
Crystal chandelier.
in our mind means, oh, that's $5,000 we didn't budget. But, well, we could take that out of the next production budget, was their theory, or take it away from the scholars who were coming and
Yeah,
don't pay them.
that was a big problem too, because we didn't have just our bare bones budget for the production, but we did get a really great grant from Mellon. But unfortunately, it was not for our production in any way. It was to bring international scholars to a conference in Atlanta around the opening of this. So they knew that we had money, that we had gotten money from Mellon, and they thought we were like withholding it or something. And no, it's restricted. It can only be spent on per diems, hotels, airfare, you know. So I think that was part of.
So the idea of the project was to use the performance as the magnet to get international scholars and cultists here to have a conversation about that. So the Mellon Foundation said, well, at first they were going to fund the whole thing, and then they withdrew and said, well, we won't fund any production activity, but we'll give you money for the conference. So we had this $50,000 conference amount that we couldn't take a penny from to pay for new paint or a new lighting instrument or whatever. And
Or a curtain that had a hole in it, or.
And most theaters simply wouldn't have made that information available to the artist, so you wouldn't have that temptation or
Right.
frustration. But we speak openly about everything and with our artists, so that became a bit of a problem, but not insurmountable either.
That was for the Hamlet. That
Just
was
the
for
end and
Hamlet.
failure of a project. That wasn't insurmountable.
So how did things end then with the French? If you had this 5-year plan and you didn't get to finish it, did it sort of end despite that in a good way, or were they
I
very
think it was
sad or
it was-
irritated?
I think it was bittersweet. I think with Artur, who was this director of the first piece, who was very spoiled. He was one of the ones who was really upset about money, and he was chosen as they don't have an NEA. They have like a Ministry of Culture, and he's chosen as one of their their prime people. And once you're chosen, that's it. Like you get anything you want until you die. I mean, it's just he had a. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. And then, the next director was Eric, and the idea was that we were going to do this with Albert. Can't remember his last name. Wonderful man. Worked mostly in Africa. It was very, very wealthy, but sort of chose a simpler life and lived in. What's the name of that?
I
In
know,
the Congo.
I'm lost. There's a story I don't know about.
No, yes, you do. You're just not thinking. He was going to work with Ismail, and this was going to be the fourth play. And he came to Atlanta with his wife, Albertine, and she was lovely. And, we started trying to look at locations and do different things. And then we never could get the rest of the money. And so he just didn't kind of come back. But it was, I can't remember the name of it. And
I'm not sure what you're talking about
the
exactly.
last project of Coltès that didn't work out.
Uh-huh.
And we brought he and his
Something
wife.
about Night in the Forest.
Night in the Forest. That's it. Night in the Forest. Yeah. But I mean, he was not upset with us or anything. I mean, he could see our situation, and
I think my feeling overall is that we were under the understanding from our meetings with consul officials here in Atlanta and then a number of bureaucrats in the French government that this was a project that was not only of interest, but that they would develop a system of support for it. And that not only didn't that happen, what support we started with fizzled out to something that wasn't really useful, but yet we were stuck in the middle of this project with obligations and expectations, and I just couldn't see a way out of it. There was no way for us except to get in trouble or get in debt.
Right.
Emory decided they would take
Mostly.
it over.
I'm sorry.
And the last, the last dying gasps, Emory, graduate students or one particular person at Emory, I can't remember exactly, wanted to kind of take it over, and nothing ever happened to it. It just kind of lay there. But our original inspiration was just to expose people to this incredible playwright. It would be as if you'd never heard of Shakespeare, and you say, "Hey, look, you want to read this?" You know. And so that was the idea, is just to get Coltès into the American mainstream ultimately, which is kind of odd. But
Meanwhile, Ismail has finished a number of other plays and essays and articles by Coltès, and is in France especially acknowledged as a sort of an expert at it, and he's there quite a lot, and he performs also in a number of theater companies there. So he developed a kind of a career for himself.
That's great.
a real relationship with this one director, Artur, again the director from Black Battle. So yeah, he goes back and forth and plays in different Shakespeares and different things. It's also something about how things happen is we have a friend you may know, Turner Schofield, or Scott Turner Schofield. He's a very famous transgender artist from here in Atlanta, or I guess maybe anyway, went to Emory, and he was working at our theater, and he performs there, but he was also working, I think, in the office helping us do stuff. And
He was the Princess Grace Fellow.
That's right.
There.
That's right. He won the Princess Grace Fellow, and that was his job, was to sort of be part of our staff and did, interesting things and not so interesting things. But part of this is he developed this really great relationship with Eric, who was the artistic director of the theater in Lorient and also of this production. This was the Cotton Fields production. And so, unbelievable, they hit it off great. He invited him back to Lorient. He went back to Lorient, and then they started, and they produced his show there, which was 127 Easy Steps to Become a Man. And then he hired him as an actor in the company, and then he toured all over France. And so for an entire season, he was simply part of the Lorient company, and then he got some directing gigs over there and all this stuff. Now he's back, and he's performing in, I guess last place was Seattle or the West Coast somewhere, and so. But we were having lunch, and he said, it's just about people liking you and having the contact with people. Like, for example, he said all of that happened because, first of all, you brought Eric to 7 Stages, and then Eric liked me. And then we started to work together. And I was the same with Joe Chaikin, like 15 years with Joe Chaikin. And then people would say, "Well, Joe, why do you work in Atlanta?" He said, "Mostly, I like Faye and Del. Mostly, Faye and Del." It's just like, so I mean, you can't buy that. You can't.
It was his day job. And he and Sam Shepard had a joke about their day jobs. And Sam said, "Well, your day job is working in Atlanta." And Sam and Joe would say, "Yeah, well, your day job is taking $1 million movies," which is really what he did. I mean, he's done all these shit movie roles. Sam does, but he's great in every one of them.
I'll tell you,
he always plays a general running things or in some war room or something, and he's so convincing as that goofy kind of character. I can't believe it.
I'll tell you one thing about Sam Shepard, though, and I have my issues with Sam Shepard. Some in his writing, of course, but also in his sort of, I don't know what you call that kind of a fellow, playboy, I guess, or something. And but the things that I experienced between him and Joe, and they really, Sam is definitely not gay, but they fell in love with each other. They walked back from there's a famous story. They were at like a party. I want to say it's in Harlem. It may not have been that far.
Yeah, it was way up there.
And the two of them walked basically the whole night together, laughing and talking all the way back to the West Village. And like when we were working at the Public, either before it started or at the end, and Joe's a little tiny guy and Sam's 6-something, and he would they would hug, but it wasn't like see ya. It was like just and you could just feel the love between them. And like when Joe would say, Sam, more woman, you know, he'd go, okay, Joe, you know, all right, whatever. And Joe was in charge. I mean, definitely Joe was just so sweet. And actually, this ridiculous critic from the Journal-Constitution, we were...
Ooh, do we want to get into that?
Well, I won't mention his name.
Okay.
Generous enough to let the Constitution sort of have a crack at... I mean, we asked Sam would he be interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yes, I will, but I'm not going to talk about anything I don't want to talk about. And the whole focus of the interview should be the collaboration between Joe and I on this project for the Olympics. So Sam, they flew up this interviewer from the AJC, and he comes to our rehearsal at the Public, and right away he starts in about movie stars, and he said, excuse me, this is not what we're going to talk about. Okay?
What's it like living with Jessica?
Yeah, and then he just wouldn't stop, and he said, and then finally Sam said, look, you check, because the guy didn't have any other questions. He was like flipping through, and they were all movie star questions. And so Sam says, listen, I'm going to go out and have a smoke, and you take a minute and you look over your notes, and I'll be back. And then I think, didn't Dan get up and run away?
Yes.
Yeah.
And sadly,
Yeah, he got up and ran away.
not long after that, he
No.
Yeah.
But so Sam comes back
died,
and he
committed suicide.
yeah, he did. But Sam comes back and he goes, where'd the guy go? Could have ran away.
Wow.
And then we just laughed and talked. About the fact that it was such an awkward, weird. And he was saying, and he literally sat down next to Joe and put his arm around him and said, "You have to interview both of us. Don't you understand? That's why I'm even agreeing to this interview is because of Joe." And the guy couldn't get it. But yeah. In the end, it was really sad because he wrote an article, and he said mean things about Sam. Oh, well, he was just your typical standoff movie star, or, not like totally. You didn't have the impression of what might have really happened.
Oh, wow. I want to go back. You mentioned during the time you were working with the people in the Netherlands about the lesson learned, the best ideas happen over food. Talk to me a little bit about some other lessons learned over the years.
You mean recipes? Because Faye and I are
Recipes of?
we cook a lot, and we invite people over a lot, and so we're sort of known for that.
Historically, yeah, that's been our.
And we used to make margaritas that were like so incredible, but for some reason we've lost the touch. But anyway, other things other than food.
Is there anything else that just pops to mind based on your experiences over the years, or working with people over the years, that you would just sort of say, hey, this is something that we really can take away from our time at Seven Stages, that this is something that I want to make sure that we learn and that we share with other people.
Yeah, I think honestly, like even just speaking yesterday with the Israeli artists, people feel so welcomed. You're so welcome, and you've been so good to us, and you treat us so amazingly well, and thank you. And it's just this energy, because a lot of times you go to a theater and it's not like that, So I think one of the things we've learned is, as artists ourselves, because we're in the office, but we're also really artists first, that we know what that's like to be sort of in the, you're stuck in your hotel room, you don't know where to go, you don't know what to do, or even just confused or lost in the situation of the work of the theater, whatever. But there's just this always openness and willing to work together and figure it out, and. I think that's part of really what really holds it together and what creates it. We have always said, maybe that's a lesson in too, that the theater itself is a building, but it's the energy of the theater that is significant, really. That's what is there. And that energy is everybody who's ever been in there. It's like a collection of all these amazing artists and experiences and people. And those are things I think I learned over the years. And like I said with Ellen, she said, don't pay attention to products. You want to be with artists, work with the artists, and so that's what we've really done. And it's turned out to be. I don't think there's another way to do it, at least not for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel that artists think of themselves as special and different. They want to be treated special, and but they're seldom treated with respect, except by peers, colleagues, other artists, or whatever. The nagging awareness that most artists have is that in the society that's structured, they're somewhere near the bottom if there's a hierarchical structure, or somewhere on the outside if there's some other sort of structure, but definitely not like in the midst of stuff. And so I think it's really important for organizations and people that want to host other artists that they provide them with that they need spiritually. It's a spiritual kind of food. You need to make them feel special. I remember going to this studio in Rotterdam when we first started traveling to the Netherlands, and this company, Onafhankelijk Toneel, that Faye was talking about, means the independent theater. So, we got on the bus or the train from Amsterdam to go to Rotterdam, and we're talking about, well, what are we going to expect? Well, I think they're going to be involved in a rehearsal and they're going to show us some scenes or something. So we got to the studio, and in the studio is a banquet laid out for us. And there's all the company with these bottles of wine and this really elaborate food set out, and they wanted to let us know that they thought we were important. And it was an impression that really struck home to me. And I think from that point on, early 90s, we started being more elaborate in the way that we treated people. And, in a way, there was a kind of a response to that. It's not a hypocritical, puffing up of others. But, if you tell them that their performance was wonderful, you look them in the eyes and you tell them that, and you embrace them well, and you have conversations about that. And then, by the way, you have a beer together or something like that, too. So all of that is a kind of an indefinable ambiance, I suppose, that Faye and I consciously try to create, that we hope permeates the culture of our organization, and then hopefully audiences and artists both benefit from that, too. So I think that's a kind of a thing you can't put your finger on. You can't, measure it like a budget as a failure or success or something like that, but it's a kind of a climate that has kept us enduring even against all odds and when resources have collapsed.
There are many, many people in the world who consider Seven Stages an artistic home. I think that's an incredibly important thing. And years ago, I was walking down the street with Ellen, and we were just going to have dinner, and we were in New York, and she said, everybody, all these people kept saying, "Hey mama, hey mama, hey mama," and we were laughing. I said, "Girl, you can't get down the street, And she said, "Dad, but that's my secret. Somewhere in the world, every minute, someone is breathing a good thought for Mama." So I mean, you can just meet people. I get emails from people. "You don't remember me, but I was in a show, and oh my God, it changed my life." And but I think that is an actual entity, that all that good energy. And I think always that the art has always been at the heart of what we're doing. It's not about popularity contests. It's just about doing the good hard work.
I think that sums it up perfectly. What have you learned about each other by working together over the years? How do you think your relationship is different now, having spent all this time in this organization, creating this organization, doing it together, versus if you'd still had your personal relationship but you had been in different organizations? Would you still be together?
Yeah.
Good question. I mean, I think about this, the idea of people working together, and it's a kind of a traditional idea, and it was only really in the last I could say 75, maybe 100 years, that people didn't work together pretty much all the time. It was like a mom and pop grocery with the kids in there, a farm, everybody's out working in the fields, that sort of thing. And so it's a much more modern and Western idea of kind of not being together. But as I look at other friends of mine who have stayed together or not stayed together, I think, and of course we have no children, but I think the thing that has managed to enrich our relationship is it's more than just the personal. It's something that's larger than us, and our extended family is our family, both of us, because of all the work we've done together. And so I think that's it gave it a purpose that sometimes, like if you just have a relationship with somebody, it's we're going to brunch or we're going to do this or that, and it's all great. But we would be there, 4 o'clock in the morning painting sets together, and then go get drunk after or whatever,
Right.
Celebrate, cry. So we shared all of those events together. And in terms of Del, my respect and has just continued to grow and grow and grow. specifically as an artist, but also as a man, like as a person who something happens, he keeps his level head. He knows he's going to do what needs to be done. It's kind of so.
Well, I was impressed with Faye explaining ideas I'd never heard of before. Anthropology, astrology, science, feminist issues, and
Maybe
such matters, and I think of myself, and when we first met, thought of myself then too, I think, as a sort of an intellectual person who likes ideas, not an intellect necessarily, an intellect but not an intellectual maybe, and so I was exploring my realm of ideas, and then I met up with Faye, and boy, she exploded my presumptions as well as what I was thinking, and then introduced me to all these other new ways of thinking too, and by the way, they were very compatible with my ideas about theater too, so it helped me to realize that, well, there's another person in the world who can help me to grow as an individual, and she's right here. And so that was a fortuitous sort of goal. I mean, a discovery, I think. It wasn't a goal.
Yeah. And just easier to do it if there's two of you.
Mm-hmm.
Just easier to do it. You can just, and what's going, you can go like,
I used to say that Faye is the inspiration and I'm the words. But, I got a lot of words from her too, so
Mm-hmm.
she inspires me. Maybe that's the proper way to say it.
That's good. One thing I was interested in is the content of your work obviously has always been very meaningful from a political or a social or cultural standpoint, etc. Have there been any, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, causes or issues that you came to through the work and that you then later pursued personally as a cause that you wanted to support? Because I'm guessing that a lot of the work that you did, maybe the cause came first or the issue was of interest to you and that's what led you to the work. I'm not sure, is that right or not? I'm wanting to sort of understand and have you talk a little bit about sort of the content of the work, and did your interest in whatever topic lead you to the work, or did the work lead you to the topic?
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's both.
But I would say both, yeah.
For example, I'll tell you one example I think I mentioned in the last interview, so cut me off if I am repetitious here, but we had a guy, we were doing a play that I wrote, one of a series of plays called the Mama Dada trilogy that I wrote. And so there's this one guy who's dressed all in blue with a blue face. Now I think of it, it anticipates the blue mind. Well, anyway. So he had these lesions that were developing on him. We were all concerned about it. We didn't know quite what it was, but we'd heard these rumors about Grady Hospital, and so he went to Grady, and they admitted him overnight, but then they not only said you can't come back in the morning, but they took everybody out of that wing that night at Grady, and he came back to rehearsal that night and said, well, they don't quite know what it is yet, but there are a bunch of us who have it, and we all seem to be gay. And I said, oh, well, I don't know. And so he slept in the theater for some days until he could find a new housing situation, and he was a wonderful performer. And by the way, we have that on videotape here in the archives. And
his name is Dale Belt.
Dale Belt. He passed away within that year, I think. Mysteriously then, but now we know what it was. We didn't even know what to call it in the very first days. So there are things like that that became the inspiration that led to to our commitment to always support AIDS awareness and consciousness and all that's involved with that. And so that's why I'm sure that's one reason Rebecca began hanging around with us and we with her, Rebecca Ranson, for a long while, because we were interested in how to serve that community. She even formed a nonprofit called SANE.
M-E.
SANE, yeah. And it was a group, one of the first groups for gay and lesbian artists in Atlanta. And so in that case, it was our direct involvement with the incident that caused it. In some cases, it was like my interest in figuring out about race and racism and where do we fit in relationship to that. That was from study and stuff that I was aware of and growing up during the civil rights movement days, it was, still is, on my mind every day.
It was an interesting subject also that we were, or I should say, I was totally unaware of, and that was this. There was a difference between being black and being less black, which is structure, societal structure, which I was unaware of, and we did this play called Molly's What Drove Molly Mad, and it was written by Lamar Alford, who had been an opera singer in New York City and had been a member of La Mama's original company, and he was currently teaching at Morehouse, and he was the director of the Morehouse Choir, and because of Ellen, and we obviously met each other, and then he had this wonderful script that he wanted us to do, and he was a brilliant musician, and the script was What Drove Molly Mad, but it was about being light-skinned in the South and what all that meant, and I still remember one of the songs in it was "I am the first black debutante," and in this pink kind of chiffon-y kind of outfit and stuff. So this, and What Drove Molly Mad was this schism in her between this, so that was a whole other subject that I had just never even known about.
And when was that produced? When did you do that?
Oh wow, that was before '84. No,
83, 4, 5, around in there,
Yeah.
early 80s.
Okay.
yeah,
It was around the time that Tyler Perry was homeless in the streets of Atlanta. And we suspect that he came in and saw that show. Anyway, there's a film that's suspiciously close in plot. But that's another subject. Mr.
Wow.
Perry, no offense, sir.
Wow.
What
So,
else? What are we talking
well,
about?
one thing I wanted to probe a little bit more, and just, I'm sure you could talk for an hour on this, but I wanted to get it in the record, so to speak. You've mentioned La Mama several times, and I know she was a big influence on you. Can you give us just a very brief overview of her name, what her background was, how you guys crossed paths, and why she is such an influence for Seven Stages?
Well, I'd just start off by saying that Ellen Stewart, also known as La Mama, named by her actors La Mama, we believe she is originally from New Orleans area, although she never was quite forthcoming with that. But she had that kind of great, fabulous accent, that you have from that part of the world. And she was a young fashion designer, very successful, living in New York. And her brother, whose name I don't remember, Paul, yeah,
was a playwright.
Was a playwright. And so she wanted to support her brother, and
Foster.
so she wanted to support her brother, and decided that she would try to make a theater for him, basically, so he could get his work done. And she was earning a lot of money. And
when was this?
Late 50s?
Mid-50s.
Okay.
And
There was no other alternative theater in New York in the middle 50s.
with Chico.
And there was a group called El Chino,
Chino. That's
Cafe
right.
Chino, started basically by some avant-garde, some beat poets who wanted to do theater. And then came La Mama.
And then Open Theater and Living Theater.
Mhm.
And the Living Theater's Julian Beck and Judith Malena. So they were that. And so that's really how she started. And her stories are, hilarious, because they never could find a space to be in. And so they had one theater where the only toilet was up center. So if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to go before the show, or you couldn't go at all, And then if someone did need, all the actors would have to come out of the bathroom and stand there while the patron went in. And she said, I had no idea. One night, the Ford Foundation came and gave me a check for $100,000. And she goes, I thought that's how it was going to work. I had no idea. And but Ellen Ellen is the grande dame of American theater.
So how did your paths cross?
Well, we were working with a woman. Actually, we lived in the same house with her. Her name is Cece Perrin, and she's an African American woman who is a native of Atlanta. And she was working in New York at Ellen's Theater. She was part of the ETC company. Again, Sam Shepard was part of that company. A lot of very successful people were. And she had moved back. Cece moved back because of her mom's health. And so Ellen came to visit Cece. And so we all lived, and Ellen didn't want to stay in a hotel. She goes, I want to be where the people are. I don't want to. So she stayed in our house, in our spare bedroom, and we just hung out, and it was really terrific, and she imparted like this wisdom to us, about.
She came a number of times.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Her grandfather is
that's
a
right.
very famous Confederate war general whose statue is here in front of the Capitol building.
I think he was a governor, wasn't he?
Stewart.
Didn't he? Yeah, Stewart.
And so one day we came down with a big piece of paper and pencils and scribbled that down for her, and I'm sure it's in her archives now in New York. But yes, she's definitely the result. Her family is the result of the indiscretions of some southern Atlanta war generals.
And she couldn't get critics to come to the Lower East Side, and she couldn't get any equity contracts, so she just said, and she went to Europe. She took the company and went to Europe, and of course in Europe they rolled out the red carpet for her, and loved the work, and she came back to New York a huge success, and she went on strike until equity gave her a contract, and the critics started to come down and see what she was up to.
And when was it that you connected? Was it in the 70s, the 80s?
It had to be in the 80s, early 80s. Yeah, early 80s, because it was right at the it was not at the very, very beginning of our theater, but it was like early into it. And I guess we have great photographs of us all sitting together and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. And then, of course, we would always go to New York and visit her, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
And then, plus, her whole idea was, she had two ideas. One is, like, preserving art in a way that she would travel to, like, Japan. And northern Japan, there were indigenous people who were very much, like, what we would consider Native American. And they had, I don't want to say they worship, that's not the right, but their sacred animal was a bear.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like that she brought, like, a company from there to New York. Just trying to, see the diversity of culture and preserve it and sort of expose it. That was one of her really big missions later, like in the latter part of her career. And she has several spaces. She has several buildings with multiple spaces, cabarets, and different
And she's
shows.
still alive?
No, unfortunately, she passed away not too long ago, a year or so.
2 years ago.
2 years. Yeah. But so she left a tremendous legacy, and like we would sit there and she'd watch these movies on TV, and she's, oh babies, like she's looking at Nick Nolte and all these major movie stars. Oh, he was one of my babies, But I don't mean to make her sound like she's doddering or anything.
Right.
Believe me, she's very sharp.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she started all these people off. Like Ping Chong is one of her babies. She helped put him on the map, and the NEA gave her, I think, $5,000 one year or $8,000 for the year from the National Endowment for the Arts, and she sent it back. She said this wouldn't even pay for Ping's office space.
Wow.
But that's pathetic too. That a woman of her stature and then they send her $8,000.
It's not a happy topic, but you just said NEA, and I wanted to jump back to that as a springboard to one thing I wanted to probe a little bit more on. I know in your interview, and I can't remember if we talked about it in yours, Faye, about the NEA issue with 7 stages, etc. In addition to that incident, are there any other times where you encountered the form of censorship in whatever form it may have taken? Either self-censoring, knowing we don't want to go down this path because either it's going to cause problems politically or funding-wise for us, or had censorship. It just seems like from the outside, you've dealt with such a wide variety of topics and sometimes controversial topics that maybe to an outsider it looks like that you were sort of blessed in that you guys really didn't encounter censorship a lot, or didn't encounter a lot of the maybe pushback that an outsider might have anticipated you facing. Now that may or may not be true,
Right.
but I'm just curious your perspective on that and the whole issue of censorship in whatever form you want to define that.
I think that probably what censorship did exist of us from the outside, we don't really know about. Although somebody said one time in a conversation, well, you know how people feel about you, like 7 stages or whatever, and I was like, that just didn't quite, and it just sort of disappeared into the rest of the conversation, so that's a kind of a, but the lack of funding, that kind of censorship is weird. But I think for my part and for Dell's part, although I would say he's maybe even more the leader, no, that was like, oh really, you think we can't go down there? Better get out of my way, because here I come. It was never about running away from anything like that,
Yeah, I think if anything, we've forged through any kind of resistance, including self-censorship about any given subject, and the more tabooish the subject was, the more inclined we were to want to pursue it. And we thought of every idea we came up with as something that required a new way of doing it. And we didn't want to be a theater, we don't want to be a theater that is so formulaic that it looks like other theaters, or it looks like things we've done before. Now granted, a lot of theater has to look similar, but if you do a play about HIV and AIDS, and you do a play about race and racism, the way they look on stage has to be different because of what the subjects are. And so holding the subjects up for artists and audiences to look at is like holding up a crystal with facets, and you have to illuminate each of those facets in the performance. You can't let things be dangling, otherwise it reinforces the need for self-censorship to begin with. So the fact of resistance to ideas is what encourages us to go forward into those ideas, and you know, that's why the theater is constructed as it is. I should mention that, because proscenium theater is based is a theater that creates a kind of a barrier between the audience and the performance, and so our not building that means that we want to destroy that with every performance, so that the ideas get right to the audience, and the audience doesn't have decorations and doorways and such to interfere.
So describe the physical space for someone seeing this interview.
Well, Seven Stages is a renovated cinema. It has two spaces, a 200-seat, what's called a front-on proscenium, meaning the seats are stacked, 20 rows, 20 seats of 10 rows, and you look directly at the audience from this perspective, and it's a flat floor.
You look at the stage.
Yeah.
You look at the stage, which is a flat floor, 45 feet long and 35 feet deep, and 19 feet to the grid. So there's no proscenium arch. When we need places for actors to go, we usually put in curtains, or we build false furniture or whatever. So it was designed, you know, so that the psychic barrier between the audience and the spectator gets broken down. And so how the director does that in each performance is what makes it really interesting and compelling. Yeah, that's what I would say about that.
About the building.
About the building.
Yeah, and the building has also always been, we've had a lobby, if you can call it that, in all of the spaces, because originally we were on Moreland Avenue, and we've always had a visual arts gallery, as best that we can. From time to time, we've had curators, from time to time, you know, been friends, whatever. But we've always tried to sort of maintain that kind of commitment to have some visual arts in the space as well. And then there's a smaller backstage, great same height, narrow, tall room that holds about 75 people. Well, you maybe call that the main stage in the studio, but
The plan has always been to try to take over the Variety Playhouse next door and make that into a complex, and including a new parking lot, and building a third story for visiting artists. And this is all not just conceptual. We've got the floor, we've got the drawings and plans ready to go.
We've gone down the road a few times.
We've tried for 10 years to get that project together and haven't yet.
Need to win the lottery.
Yeah. Or we need to partner with a developer or something.
Anyway, Dad's Garage has now moved in, and they share the space with us, and they're very interested to remain there in the long term. They are there temporarily while they find their own space, but now that they're there, they like it. So, you know, they have access to a lot more money than we do, so we just want them to finish a renovation for us, and then we'll share the space with them. So, Dads, you've got your marching orders.
One thing I wanted to get back on before I got to the next topic is just on the self-censorship issue. You said that when you encountered a taboo topic, you would push through it. Can you just, either of you, talk about a specific case of where that took place and how that evolved into the production or whatever? Just an example would be interesting, I think.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny, I'm thinking about myself. I'm not coming up with anything, but I do remember having a very heartfelt conversation with Athol Fugard, we were, he was talking about Master Harold and the Boys, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's a play about a young English boy who's like 16 or 17 years old and a high school kid, and these two older men, much older, like 50, 60 years older, who work in his mother's cafe. And he comes in after school one day, and he totally, like, this man took care of him as a boy his whole life, loved him, and now he's becoming a white man, and all of a sudden he's starting to realize other things, and so some incident happens or what, and this is autobiographical. I mean, Fugard is writing about himself, and he always writes in longhand, always, because he says there's a direct connection from the heart to the hand, except he's left-handed. So anyway, he said he actually had to pause at that moment because he spits in the man's face, and he couldn't write it. I mean, he could not write that about himself, that he had done that, and he just, and so, but he did write it. He did push through that and write it and put it out there. So in a sense, I think it's not from my own personal experience, but that's the kind of idea behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So is it telling the truth? Is the censorship that you're afraid? I mean, to tell the truth, right? So, but somehow you have to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, trying to think about how to put this delicately.
Uh-oh.
But I guess it's just for private archival use. So, Karen Finley is a very famous performance artist from New York. She did a few shows at our theater, and
some here in Georgia State.
She was noted for pouring chocolate all over her naked body and then giving long monologues about how America's corporations are harming us.
And she was one of the NEA4.
One of the NEA4. And so, okay, so there's one performance where she has this chocolate dripping all over herself and she's naked on the floor. And so she, I don't think I'm going to tell this story, Hillary. I'll
That's
tell
fine.
you afterwards.
That's
but
fine.
This is something because I wouldn't want to tell this story without having her say, yes, it's okay.
That's fine. That's fine. Not a problem at all.
So anyway, I can tell another Karen Finley story. She did a show with a friend of hers here called George and Martha. It was a story about George Bush and Martha Stewart in bed one night in a hotel room. So they were both painted, they were naked, of course, painted red, white, and blue stripes.
She was in these like stripes.
Wow.
So I would suppose that was a very highly politically charged performance, as you can imagine, and the theater was filled up to overflowing, people who heard about this thing, and they showed up, and we expected there was going to be some kind of political backlash and response, but it wasn't. It was completely embracing of the idea that we could say these things and we could be like this in public, and in a way it was like kids thinking, well, maybe we can get away with it or something. So, the great lesson about the theater is that, you are allowed to be children again, and that's what makes it charming for the audiences.
Mm-hmm.
And for just a moment, they get to be kids with you.
Right. One thing I wanted to touch on a little bit as we start to wind down is in some of the notes that you had sent prior to the interview, I was intrigued and wanted to have you both talk a little bit about some of the aesthetics vis-a-vis Seven Stages and the whole issue of presentational versus representational.
Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned that, and I wanted you to expound on that a little bit.
Well, aesthetics means the beauty of something. How beautiful is it is how I think of aesthetics, which really takes you to what is beauty, what's the nature of beauty, which takes you to what are you about and what about other people. So all of it, to me, aesthetics is connected with the human spirit and trying to discover that more than it is with understanding a formula about the relationship between feeling and art and visual elements in a painting or something like that. In the case of theater, there are two basic approaches. One is presentational theater, the other is representational theater. And in presentational theater, the performance tries to present reality in a certain way. I'll come back to that. In the representational theater, reality is represented as more or less equal. So that's what we call realism or naturalism. That's what constitutes films, television. That's representational theater, and that's most of probably 90% of theater in the U.S. Stories by Tennessee Williams, Arthur Miller, and current kids writing stories like that. Presentational theater, though, is about not representing, not trying to recreate like this room, but present the room as an element of that representation. So you might take a piece of a table rather than the whole table, or you might have a butterfly representing a bird. So representational becomes very poetic and abstract in its nature, and it requires the audience to participate directly in the ideas and feelings that are being expressed by the performers. So without the trappings of set designs, proscenium arches and such like that, the ideas and feelings of the story kind of come clearer across this, what used to be a barrier but is now, I guess, kind of a river of understanding between the audience and the performer. And this presentational form of theater it started back in the teens, 19-teens, with symbolism, where you take...
Now you're saying you mean representational?
I'm sorry. Presentational theater is like where you're trying to show reality, but not as reality.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I was following the labels correctly.
A pencil means something else in a symbolist play, for example.
So, and that's presentational.
That's presentation. You're presenting the idea of pencil.
I just want to make sure I'm.
You're also, what I think is interesting is that you're also allowing the room for the viewer to fill in space. Like because as a set designer, the aesthetics, like Joe used to always say, simple, it's better. Simple,
And cheaper.
And cheaper. And same with Beckett, who is one of my great loves in life. And I mean, the economy of language is one of the things that I really admire about Beckett. And as he got older, he wrote fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer words. And yet the images became larger and the ideas became larger. So to me, that's an interesting idea. So how do you do that as a set designer? For sure, I'm just thinking of this play that we did, A Song for Coretta, that Pearl Clegg wrote, and
a friend of mine was in Crystal Dickinson.
Oh, I didn't know you were a friend of. Oh God, I love her so much. Oh my God, she's
the famous Crystal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you see Maria Casey too?
Yeah.
Oh, that was another of my set design, but she was so brilliant in
one
that.
One of my top productions ever.
That whole cast was great. I mean, but she was.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, but she's well worth interrupting for. It's to you, Crystal. At any rate, so I'm looking at the space. I'm down there looking at the space. So what are there? There's sort of like levels of steps, and then in the background is the cave and the grave, and then over there is the church, and the church is a big wall, and all I can see is this cross hanging out. So that's what I did. They're on waiting to go into the funeral along the line, and then I have no church. I didn't build a church. I didn't video a church. I didn't do a slide of a church. I just put a white cross that was illuminated, and I stuck it off the side of the building. I mean, the side of the wall, just like it is on the building. And then anyone who thought about that, that was the door to the church. I mean, so it just without having to just create everything and yeah.
How did you arrive at that as sort of your main artistic framework for Seven Stages? Was that just something that you guys, based on when you came up and in the 70s, that interested you? Or did you sit down one day and say, let's think about how we want to do work?
I would say it interested me before the relationship with Faye started.
Yeah.
So I brought that sort of interest. It was an interest in Grotowski, a Polish director at the time, his work that was influencing all of theater around the world. And the kind of theater that he's advocating is more like opera, where the audience, where the actors face the audience directly and speak or sing words like a poet at a reading or an opera singer, rather than having a conversation eye to eye like naturalism and representational theater is. So here, from the perspective of the audience, where the audience is, if I'm having a conversation with her, I'm really only getting to see half of the face of the actor. Mm-hmm. And so that cheats the audience of 50% of a physical manifestation. So facing front, not only does it make the volume go forward in the difficult little theaters that we operate, but it helps to reduce that psychic barrier because communication becomes dominant. I'm looking in the direction of the audience, just like in life, when people don't always establish eye contact, rather than being in a person's I view just to create the impression of something that looks like real,
Mhm.
like life or something. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean that was and is a conflict that's going on in the theater now between representational and presentational, and I think because of the influence of rock and roll and performance, the way it's done, it's being presented to the audience directly. That's going to win out eventually, and there will be fewer and fewer plays in what we call the traditional realistic sense. It seems to be the direction we're going in right now.
Because for me, I grew up in New York, and in the late '60s, mid-late '60s, I was very lucky because, like I said, I was just maybe at the right place at the right time, because I was, I could go to see Richard Schechner and some of the amazing productions that he created around the Vietnam War, and the Wooster Group, and all of these people who are, just major influences. And I just had the opportunity to go there. And one of the Schechner plays I saw, it was really interesting because it took place in a diner, but the seating is what I remember the most about it. Was all wooden planks, and you had to climb up really high on these ladders, and then you just sat there, and there was a plank here too, but you just sat there like this watching the diner, and I'm like, oh my God,
I saw that show too.
You did?
I didn't know that. It's like all cops, right?
Yeah. Oh, how weird. At any rate, see, I'm still learning things about each other.
Yeah, because I remember the precarious.
See, it's not. So anyway, those kinds of opportunities. The Royal French Court in doing Marat de Sade in New York, and I just went by myself and had a ticket because I didn't really even know what I was going to see, but it sounded cool. I was like, that guy came out with it and went boom. I said, okay, this is it. I'm in for something really special. You know how they knock the stick? So for me that was a great opportunity, and it was just the right time for it. That I wasn't interested in that other stuff anyway. It was boring now.
Right. See if there's anything else that I wanted to make sure we cover. Is there anything else that you guys want to make sure that you get on the record, so to speak? Is anything else that you're interested in making sure future generations know about 7 stages that we haven't covered?
It's hard to remember what we said.
Here's something interesting. So, talking about self-censorship issues.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a project I'm now working on that I chose not to work on or develop the whole time I was with 7 Stages and before. So back when after I got out of undergraduate school, I was a high school teacher in Louisville, and then I went to graduate school at Georgia University in Athens. And this was during the Vietnam War days. And it was there that I heard the statistic about the number of suicides that were happening with war veterans returning. And then at the end of the war, 52,000 men and women died in Vietnam. 58,000 had committed suicide who were there. And that number was so astonishing that for decades I had to keep checking it to verify that I hadn't misremembered it, but I know it's correct. Now the same sort of proportion about Afghanistan and Iran, and I was deeply influenced by the mother of who committed suicide of several teenagers when I was once a camp counselor, and so and now that I'm getting older, the idea of suicide has sort of been in the back of my mind the whole time. So I've decided to write a play with Robert Orr Price, my colleague in Maryland, and we've written this play about assisted living and suicide for the elderly. Now I can tell by testing it out on some of my friends who are directors and people around that nobody wants to touch a play about something that is so commonly discussed around the table at home in most families. Most people have experience of that, just as they do with AIDS or even same-sex marriage, I suppose, these days. So that it's still a taboo subject after all these years is amazing to me, because it's not just me but others as well who don't want to confront that issue. And I understand it totally, and I'm completely happy with my life. I'm not frustrated or anxious or want to end my life. But on the other hand, when I get to a certain point,
you would like to
I
have
would
the right.
be in control of it, and I think that's a major issue for us in the future.
And people, I think rightly so, talk about us sometimes treating our pets with more
Yes.
concern and care than we do
Yes.
other humans
Really?
Absolutely.
at the end of life.
I mean, I have so
Yeah.
many friends who were therapists, and when I told them we were working on this, they were all like, "Oh my God, this is so important. Nobody thought you have. This is such an important."
I really do
subject."
feel that is a taboo subject, the
Yeah.
whole issue of death and mortality,
Mhm.
and it's just something that no one wants to address.
And but it is interesting that in other cultures, for example, and there's a lot of, because we've been doing obviously research,
Mhm.
but there's a lot of suicide that takes place in Japan, and they're trying to deal with that. But on the other hand, Japan has a totally different point of view about suicide. Like it's an honorable thing. You do it to save your family or whatever. Whereas here, it's considered, well, it's a crime. It's cowardly. It's selfish. Yeah, all those
Above
things.
all, which it is.
And so it's it's kind of weird. And I don't know.
So I'm curious, you said you had this sort of in the back of your head for a long time. Why now? Is it just that you've gotten older, or what about being with Seven Stages, if in fact that was part of your decision not to pursue it, then why did you not want to pursue it as part of
Yeah,
Seven
it's
Stages?
interesting because I felt that it would not be worth developing as a project because I couldn't imagine getting an audience to come see it. I mean, beyond a handful of friends or therapists, a very small kind of audience. And so I was talking about that with Robert Earl after, when our retirement was pending a year ago, so a year and a half ago. And I told him about this subject I was always interested in. He said, me too. And so we said, well, why don't we try to write a play together? So that's what we've been doing since then. I still don't have any confidence that anybody will want to do it, but it's been wonderful to sort of write it and look at it from all these different points of view. So I've got these different characters. One guy from Albania who speaks with puppets and video. It should be elaborate enough if we can ever get anybody to do it. But I think someday, somebody looking at this archive or reading at the transcript of it will say, there's an idea. And that may be 20 or 30 years in the future.
And there were several, I know, artistic works that dealt with it, at least in the maybe the early to mid-90s, vis-a-vis the AIDS crisis,
Mhm.
Yeah.
where people had made a decision, I'm going to go out. And there was actually a film, It's My Party,
Right.
Yeah.
so that sort of dealt with that. And since that's really the last time I can remember that topic sort of being in sort of the cultural
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
It's really true. I mean, and it ties so much into this idea of the way that we worship the young people. I think that's also part of the same culture, because it's hard to have value. If basically once you get gray hair or whatever happens, then you're sort of marginalized, right? And so thinking about that, so then you have no purpose, and then if you have no purpose, your life, you have to have a purpose in order to live, I believe.
Mhm.
And so this is an odd story, but like an 80-year-old woman, or at least she looked 80 years old, in a prison camp in Serbia, showing me these wounds, huge wounds on her legs that were like black and blues this big, because she had been beaten by a rifle by a soldier, because she had tried to run away from the rest of the group. And she said that she could, but she said that she was really very, very lucky because she had value. Now this is coming through a translator, but she had value. And the value was that she could sew, and that she knew how to eat wild plants, that she knew how to eat out of the forest. And so even though she was very old, and whatever 80 I'm going to say, that whole thing was that she had value still. And it gave her dignity, and it gave her a purpose and a place in the community. And, she said, they take care of me, I have value. And so I think that another person, really, do you have value if you just play bridge on Tuesday nights? I don't know. I nothing wrong with playing bridge, but I just,
Right.
what's that thing that's right at the very core of you that makes you feel part of it, connected? So I think,
Wow.
Nice.
Nice way to end. Is there anything else that you guys would want to say?
I don't think so.
Good. This has been fabulous.
You all right?
yeah, I'm good.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Hillary.
For that,
Yeah,
we
that was
will
fun.
we will call it a wrap.